各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎收看 J 与 J 论坛，由我 Jimmy 马健与好朋友 Jim Noteware 一起为我们讨论这个礼拜的时事。Jim, how are you doing?
Good afternoon, Jimmy. I'm doing fine. Another week, another very interesting set of news and things to think about. If not outright events, then different kinds of thinking that are shaping our future.
Heading into the July 4th weekend, it's a time to reflect. Over the past few years, one of our organizations always plant American flags in Chinatown and Bel Air Boulevard to show our patriotism and to also to appreciate what this country has given us. So it's a big deal. We enjoy our fireworks. We listen to songs that remind us of why we're here and how we got here. Now,
Good.
Yes. So you're not going anywhere for July 4th. Your kids are visiting you in Houston.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes.
Always
but
good.
The other reason why July 4th is very important, it's my birthday. and every year people help me celebrate. It's just amazing how
the whole country celebrates.
How much noise everybody makes. It's a wonderful reason to get together.
Wait, your birthday is on actual July 4th?
Yes.
Oh, wow. The birth of our nation. This is greatness, Jim.
Yeah. And you can probably see I'm wearing Stars and Stripes socks.
I love it. Well, so throughout your years, the fireworks, the parties, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
It also gives you more of a weight on your shoulder to live the best life, to be the best you can be, to not let down your birthday.
No, that's all true. That's all true. So
happy birthday, Jim.
Thank
I hope
you.
You have a great one. I hope it gets better and better every year.
Yeah.
We will celebrate. Hopefully we get to see each other. Now we're all vaccinated. We'll definitely have to meet soon, break bread.
Yep.
That means I haven't seen you in a year. I haven't seen anybody in a year. So it's nuts.
Yeah.
Now, Jim, we've been discussing, how do I say this? Our number one foreign concern, the whole world's number one concern now is China.
Mm-hmm.
We know that in the headlines, China is celebrating its 100th birthday. And we know the party leader, Xi Jinping, is, how do I say this? It's celebrating him, is celebrating the party's success. It is very hard to cut out the success of China as a nation to the Communist Party and himself. We discussed earlier throughout the week the differences on what the Western media shows us and what is propaganda, what is considered propaganda. So let's start by talking about a very interesting article that you discussed with me about Milton Friedman when he said 17, 18 years ago about China. This is quote, "I predict that China will move increasingly toward political freedom if it continues a successful move toward economic freedom." At that time, it sounded like a good idea. Would you still say that now, 18 years later, is that still valid?
Actually, I think it is.
Oh, really?
I think the current attitude within China, which is to support President Xi, who is clamping down on political freedom and imposing much more authoritarian rule over industry, foreign affairs, certainly defense, etc. That argues in opposition to Milton Friedman's prediction. But I think that's kind of a counterexample along the long march. I think people in China have enjoyed not only economic progress over the last 20, 30 years, but a lot of freedom that goes along with the economics. For instance, people from China can travel all over the world almost at will. They can go to university and graduate school in the United States and all over the world. Those freedoms were not the case a generation or two ago. they have access to the internet. Yes, there is some censorship, but not the absolute censorship that there once was. And with both technological evolution around the world that finds its way into China. For instance, when American tech companies go there, China says, okay, you must allow us to censor you, and you must turn over to us some or all of your intellectual property. As that happens, and then China creates its own technological progress, that will argue for more efficient communication, ultimately looser communication, because it gets harder and harder to censor information and communication. And ultimately, it will come. I've become made aware over the last short period of time, increasing divisions and controversies within China. And I think those are becoming more apparent on the world stage. The question is, what comes after President Xi? How long President Xi stays in office or in power? What are the forces that may erode his direction? Those are all questions that probably no one knows the answers to, including Mr. Xi. We certainly don't know. But I think as people get economic freedom, they ultimately demand political freedom. And I'm told that Mr. Xi must respond to his political constituencies. If ultimately people are unhappy, you can't continue to rule them. You can clamp down on things, but the most authoritarian rulers in the world have never lasted. Just go back through history, particularly in the 20th century. They simply don't last. And they ultimately change. They either change in other authoritarian rulers, say like in Cuba or in Venezuela, which have just the opposite record of economic progress as China does, or they ultimately change toward freedom, which is the story in most of Eastern Europe, particularly the Balkans. I think the long march is on, and I think the reason we hear so much about President Xi and what he's doing, and there's a number of other literature items and political things that we can talk about. I think the reason we're hearing more about them is because they're more front and center. And if President Xi were the ultimate authoritarian, you wouldn't hear about them. People would suffer in silence. But the very fact that the world has its eyes on China, and not just China externally, but what is going on within China, because China represents such a large commercial market, international companies, and all the values that go along with them. For instance, what was one of the largest contributors to the downfall of the Soviet Union in the late 80s and early 90s? Consumerism. As McDonald's, other retailers, all baited Russian consumers with a taste for the better life of the West, it was very hard for then President Gorbachev to hold his power. And ultimately, it slipped away. We'll see what happens in China. China has one thing that Russia doesn't, and that is a huge population that, and you and I have talked about this over many weeks, really respects China as one China and one culture. That's a unifying element, especially given its scale. There's somebody like Russia, which is a huge geographic country, but really not very big demographically or economically. Russia has shrunk from a co-equal superpower 40 or 50 years ago with the United States to being smaller than many of our states and being smaller than many of the European countries. It's smaller economically than Germany and France. It's smaller than Texas, certainly smaller than California. So I'm changing the subject just a little bit, but I'm using Russia as an example. I don't know why the U.S. pays so much respect to Russia. I would just let Russia be. They get into international mischief, we'll help our NATO allies. They get into international mischief in OPEC and other foreign things. I think we can handle that. Texas produces more oil and gas than all of Russia. Okay. But at any rate, so I hope I've answered your question. I really appreciated that article that was written about Milton Friedman's prediction because it brings into focus. And whether you and I agree with each other or any other people agree with each other or not, the very fact that we're talking about this and exposing some of the issues, I think is very healthy.
You brought up many interesting points. In my opinion, when it comes to Russia, we'll go backwards and start pointing it out, discuss this. I think our State Department's policy and the national response to Russia is to not really tolerate, but because we need Russia's cooperation to to fight the tide of China influence. Now, China is now front and center, obviously, because of the strides it's made in the last 4 decades since they opened up their economy. The way that China's done it, the way it mixes its nationalism, its communism ideology with global economic capitalism, state-sponsored capitalism. It is a mix that we've never seen. USSR and Russia has never been able to do that. Like you said, they don't have the population, the size, nor the culture to do it. This national capitalism in China is very concerning, and the people in power there. You also mentioned an article about the wolf warrior trying to rein it back, because once you lit that match, that fire, it's very hard, or whether they're willing to spend political capital to rein it in or not, it's very hard to stop it. It's useful at a time when a country is under attack, but when China is trying to establish influence, whether it's soft power or hard power. I never did agree with the wolf warrior stance. I never thought that is the protocol for diplomacy to discuss things. I think that drops yourself down to a certain, with madmen or strongmen or military dictators, and that's how they act. If China wants to be viewed as a leader, if it wants to be liked, which is their State Department, the leadership has already said they want to be liked and welcomed. They've emphasized that in the last few months. Well, they won't be if they use this kind of rhetoric. Now, you could blame it on the previous administration here dealing with Trump's administration, but that's an excuse because...
That's an excuse.
Yeah, because that no longer is the case. This is a different administration. It's very concerning, Jim, because I don't know if Milton Friedman is right. I don't know if whether a free society could exist without a free economy, or maybe a free economy could exist without a free society. It might not.
Go back to comparing Russia and China.
Mm-hmm. Perfect analogy, by the way. It's a perfect example.
Yeah, Russia freed its economy. Russia freed its political system, but kept hold of its economy. China freed its economy, but kept hold of its political system. Exactly the opposite. And obviously, in the last 30 years, since the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union crumbled, China's looked like the smarter strategy. But I've been trying to understand what is going on with Chinese attitudes. And I'm absolutely wondering why China is resentful or suspicious of the United States. And you mentioned the wolf warriors. And I think they are a creature to rationalize this. Here's where I'm going. We all know the benefits that both Japan and Germany enjoyed because of U.S. influence after World War II. We rebuilt their economies, we rebuilt their society, or we allowed their societies to grow, and they're extraordinarily prosperous in a very short amount of time, in 50 years, 60 years, something like that. We actually had a similar, not exact, but a similar situation with China. We helped China in World War II and post-World War II in exactly the same way. One, if we hadn't entered the Pacific Theater and crushed Japan, Japan would still be in China. And that's a thought that nobody remembers anymore. But we were able to help China rid itself of Japan. Huge. Number two, if the United States had not only represented such a huge market for the manufacture of Chinese goods for the U.S. to import, but also consciously held the U.S. dollar strong, which allowed the Chinese currency to have a favor for its export economy, had we not been the source, the customer, China's industry and all of the economic gains would have had a far more difficult and slower path than we did. So I just don't understand why people, and particularly China's current leadership, isn't more respectful and grateful for.
If I may, I would like to point out why they're not and why the different perspectives have changed the narrative to our generation. 70 years after the end of World War II, 72 years to be exact. Yes, United States and the Allies defeated the Axis evil, but this part of history is not in Red China's history books, because that war was completed by the previous government that was defeated by the communists, the Russia-backed communists. That civil war erased the entire 3 decades of World War I and fighting Japan and the decades of occupation. To some communist leadership, to some Chinese people that I researched with, they would say that the only reason that the United States joined the war was Japan made the grave mistake of attacking us at Pearl Harbor.
Sure.
And we joined. China was about to basically be decimated. This race was about to be exterminated. The hatred toward the West, the suspiciousness, the gratefulness you talk about, let me be clear. This is a global capitalism at its finest. We want to make money in China. To them, they don't need to be grateful. They provided something that we needed at a low cost. Second, we did help Japan and Germany, but by helping them, it was also because of the Cold War. To China, they are very bitter about the fact that Japan was propped up by us. The war criminal emperor's family was allowed to stay in power. Imagine if Hitler's descendants are still ruling Germany. Imagine if Nazis are not hunted down and persecuted even 50 years later by the Israeli Secret Service. Apply that to Japan. Very few members of the military were executed or court-martialed. Very few. Because we had to prop Japan up quickly, because most of Asia was under USSR influence. So this is generational aggression that Chinese, Japan, Korea, Taiwan are pawns in the game between the West and USSR. Japan being propped up leaves a very, very bad taste for China, because Japan never paid for its crimes. Japan's homeland was never invaded. It has never been occupied by foreign troops. Japan never paid reparations. Obviously, communist China, after they took over 1949, shut down the country, where it was like North Korea, where it is excommunicated from the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, the national government that went to Taiwan is the one that took the credit for World War II. So there's nothing grateful about us helping Japan or Germany toward the Chinese people or the Chinese leadership. Second, that part of history is erased. Some of the younger folks might know that now. Third, when you talk about internet, the fact is China has its own social media, Weibo or WeChat. Yes, they're heavily monitored. Yes, there's surveillance everywhere. But do they get to discuss? They do. Do they get shut down? They do. China has never claimed to be a democracy. They have never promoted freedom of speech. To their argument that actually works in a way is that they use USSR's failure as the perfect example. As a matter of fact, You could even point to Japan's collapse in the 90s. We helped Japan rebuild from 1950s all the way to the 70s, and Japan took off. From the early 80s to the early 90s, Japan was the second global war power with their economic might. We realized that, and we manipulated the market, using the dollar to cause crazy inflation, and the bubble bursted. Japan never recovered in the last 30 years. Japan is in big trouble. We could talk about that in a different episode. When we study economic policy, they're a great example of that. So when China looks at what we did to Japan, they look at, these are facts. These are not perspectives. Then China's people or government will look at what happened in USSR, what happened in Russia, where it basically broke apart. If democracy went in and we strong-armed our version of democracy into this country, China will break apart too, and it will lose its power. It's united might. Because their political system is also, they have the answer to their people too. Thirdly, when we talk about freedom, you're right that China does afford some freedom. But the fact is, Gandhi has always said, a great country is judged by how this country treats its most vulnerable people. You know, I literally did field research in the last few months regarding this. If you ask Chinese immigrants, okay, to say that we're privileged because that's that they have a choice. If you ask the ones that came here in the last 10 years, not because they're skilled or university educated or because, you know, like the early immigrants from Hong Kong or Taiwan and Korea, they're highly skilled workers. The ones that came from China in the last 20 years, a lot of them are labor, blue collar. They want to make money and send it back. 20 years ago, you ask them, everyone would say, this is land of the free, the streets are paved with gold, they will never go back. But if you ask the last 10 years, if you ask them, they will all say they do not want to live here anymore. They're here to make some money and they want to go back because there's more opportunity and they feel like there's more freedom. Now, like I said earlier, it's very privileged to say that because they don't speak the language, they don't know the system, they're not educated here, they don't know what's great about this country. But that's a very subtle change in perspective. Now, our political divide, our mass shooting issues, our racial problems, our police brutality, all of that sets a bad example for Chinese people that don't understand our system, but they look forward to it. The way they view Taiwan is a perfect example. Under the previous regime, which is viewed by the West as more totalitarian, which is actually not really true because they were backed by the US the whole time, the nationalist government. They are the ones that built this economic superpower in Taiwan. They opened up and allowed direct voting in the 90s and is disintegrated. The chaos that ensued, Korea is the other example that was positive. They went through a period of chaos and they consolidated and they maintained their economic expansion and improved their political system. Taiwan went the opposite. China would not look at Korea or Japan as an example. They'll look at Taiwan. And Taiwan is the greatest failure. And that's why Chinese citizens are now saying, oh, we don't want democracy. We don't want Western. Look at what happened to Taiwan. We don't want that. Where GDP never increased in 30 years, where the standard wage never increased in 30 years, where it's falling into despair and there's no construction, there's no graft and corruption is rampant. They don't want that. They look at their leader, which this is what concerns me. This mix of national pride, communist ideology, but yet global capitalism. That's what scares me. Because that proof to them, look, we're still growing at 15, 20% every year. So our way works. But the fact this doesn't work, the most vulnerable people in China has no way. There's no social system to support them. Over here, you know, during the pandemic, you see checks going out. You know, there's social welfare systems. There's Medicare and Medicaid. In China, you are in big trouble if you don't save up. There's no safety net. And I don't know if they're addressing that issue. And you want to talk about China as one race. Essentially, the majority is the Hanzu, is one race, one nation. They don't have civil unrest. They don't have racial divide. They don't have a gun problem. They just build and make money and keep building and earning until they're able to exert the influence. But yet, global capitalism is what allowed China to increase their military power, to buy, to give out loans, to do one belt, one road. All of that, it's a chicken and egg type of issue. Are we helping them? Because we are, as United States consumers, our State Department has always took a laissez-faire attitude toward China until this last few years. Are we promoting this brand of communism and helping them? Is it too late for us to come down and condemn them? Because, Jim, no Chinese leader or citizens would think they're grateful to the United States. They will not. None of them will feel like they owe us anything, especially now with all the slander and the MacArthurism of the virus, all the Asian hate here. That gives them more fuel to look at us and attack us negatively. And some of it is not true. The fact that you have to be here to understand where it comes from. There's always two sides to it. But it is concerning to me, Jim, that the Communist Party and this 100-year celebration, it has become Xi Jinping is going back to the Mao Zedong type of personal worship. A few years ago when he announced that he's extending his term to another 4 years, we made a big deal out of it. We call him Emperor Xi. You do that now. Back then, there are other Asian countries or mainstream media that would agree. You do that now, the netizens of China will not let it go. They will sit there and say you're attacking them. Instead of being able to discuss, criticize something that is not helpful to China's social reform and political reform. Because there were political and social reform 10 years ago, 12 years ago. China has actually gone backwards. They have consolidated its power. Now, we will never know what's going on inside Zhongnanhai. We don't know the palace intrigue of the power struggle. We'll never know. Maybe he is not stable. Maybe he does need to do this so that they could have a stable growth and to maintain control. Because the other option is Taiwan or Iraq or Afghanistan or Russia. But like I said, there is no solution. We don't know. We don't know where this is going to lead us.
I think we just have to let it play out. And we have, in the West, the United States, we have to do what is in our best interest, not to hurt anybody else, but what we have to do is our own best interest. And one of the things that we need to try harder to do is to be clearer, more transparent in our own government with the communication of factual information, stop a lot of this fake news, misunderstanding, because it really serves to undermine our strength and what I call American exceptionalism. So
that's a great point, because President Obama mentioned that today that misinformation and fake news is clouding a lot of our American judgment, is making the divide even wider. Mm-hmm. But that comes with freedom of speech, right? How do you control fake information without stepping on our Bill of Rights? This is what's scary, okay? Berkshire Hathaway's vice chairman, Charlie Munger, actually praised China's move to impose the Alibaba, Jack Ma's Ant Group. He actually said that. And this is a very conservative, successful man. He is not supporting CCP, but it could be manipulated in that way. He's saying that he wishes that we could step in preemptively to stop speculation, to control the market, and let it grow naturally. He's saying that the Communist Party did the right thing by reining him off, because they were getting too big, right? Just like what's going on here. But you see how scary and dangerous that is. Mm-hmm. How do we? I don't know how to express what I mean. Jim, do you know what I'm trying to get to?
Well, I was very surprised at Munger's comments, and I would disagree with him. In the immediate example that he uses, the Chinese government may have done the right thing to put some restraint on Jack Ma and Alibaba and financial speculation. Perhaps so. But that comes at an enormous cost. And when the U.S. government has behaved that way, and it has in some respects in the past, I can go through all kinds of examples that have had terribly negative long-term effects. Part of the beauty of democracy and capitalism is you have decentralized decision-making. The free market, it takes all kinds to make a world. It takes all kinds to make a market. If you want to make a sale, somebody else has to buy. They have to be persuaded that their way is better for this asset. Anytime we centralize power too much, and in China, what they have an alignment of interest between their economic structure and their political structure. And political structure, I mean defense as well, okay? The United States, it's totally separated. And if we have a weakness, it's that American corporations behave to their own benefit, not necessarily to the benefit of the country. But ultimately, I think the right things emerge. So on this one, I have to disagree with Charlie Munger, even though, and I really don't know the particulars of the issue that he was most concerned about.
I studied at Alibaba, some company and group. We followed it for years. We profited greatly from its rise. They basically is the Google, Amazon, and Facebook of China combined with Alipay, with their economic might. What China is doing is avoiding the mistakes we made. To be honest with you, when you said that in the long run, it's never turned out well, I actually beg to differ, because of Facebook's misinformation with social media, Twitter, it allowed conspiracy groups, it allowed Russian hackers to come in and spread misinformation and allow the political unrest that we experienced in the last 5 years since the 2016 election. I don't believe Mr. Trump would have won without this kind of manipulation. And the after effects of Trump's meddling and the failure of his administration, we're still feeling the effects of it. I think it will take decades to undo, and if that even could be done. So I don't believe in a state that is controlled by corporations. I don't believe a free market, a capitalist economy means that we could allow monopolies and allow immense power held by the few.
But you see what's happening here, Jimmy, is U.S. has antitrust laws.
China doesn't.
But the United States has given the tech monopolies an exemption from those antitrust.
Yes, because we cannot catch up. They're advancing too fast.
I believe that was a tragic mistake.
Agreed. We agree.
It may have been done for the very good reasons at the time, but
I mean, think about when Facebook and Google testified in Congress. A lot of our lawmakers didn't even understand how it works or how Bitcoin works or how internet works.
They didn't.
So they couldn't. How do you make laws for something that didn't exist up until a few months or a few years ago? Right. How do you rein in on control or regulate an industry that didn't exist before? That's the hard part.
Hey, Jimmy, we're going to have to end it here soon. Okay. And I want to leave you with one final thought. I believe the economics profession and the political hierarchy need to consider something that we've never, ever considered before. And that is, we in the United States, and I think in some places like China as well, the Middle East, have allowed certain companies and certain families to amass such mega wealth that because of that wealth, they actually may have more economic and political power than the governments themselves. And if that is the case, what does it mean for regulation? What does it mean for freedoms? What does it mean? We are in that arena. We are in uncharted territory that no one understands that. So I challenge you, I challenge myself, I challenge our audience to think about that between now and next week.
Thank you, Jim. I hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy your birthday. We shall continue next week. This is a very deep and multifaceted discussion that is very important that will shape our personal fortunes and our futures and our nation's future. So thank you, Jim.
Our collective more important than our individual. Thanks, Jimmy. Enjoy.
Take care. Happy birthday again.
Bye-bye. Okay. Bye-bye.